Would you consider it a privilege to suffer, even for the faith? I know it sounds like a noble idea, but I have to be honest. I'd rather do almost anything than suffer. In the first place, I have a pretty low threshold for pain. And in the second place, I'm pretty much a wimp. I am a terrible patient. I admire folks who power through pain, but I'm not one of them. So when Paul talks about suffering as a very real possibility, I start looking for the exits. Hello, I'm Stuart Baskin, pastor of First Presbyterian Church of Tyler, Texas, and this is your daily devotional for Friday, September 19th, 2025. Paul's words to the church in Philippi are meant to encourage them to keep the faith in the face of opposition. It is actually a common theme that runs throughout the New Testament and particularly through the various epistles. What it means to keep the faith varies somewhat, but the overall message is remarkably consistent. Christians in the first century lived in a largely hostile world, and the temptation was strong to give in to the pressure to conform to the religious and moral standards that dominated Roman society. Writing to the Philippians from a prison cell, Paul was no stranger to suffering, and not only at the hands of Roman officials, but also at the hands of ordinary citizens. There is a telling story in the book of Acts that illustrates it well, and it just so happens to have taken place in Philippi itself. This is before the letter to the Philippians was written. It was when Paul and Silas were in Philippi many years earlier. They passed by a servant girl on the street who apparently had a spirit of divination. As they passed by her, she shouted, "These men are slaves of the Most High God who proclaim to you a way of salvation." The thing is, she didn't do it just once. She did it day after day whenever she saw them pass by. Finally, Paul and Silas had had enough. They commanded the spirit that gave her the ability of divination to come out, and it did. Here's now where things get interesting. We read in Acts 16 what happens next. But when her owners saw that the hope of making money was gone, they seized Paul and Silas and dragged them into the marketplace before the authorities. When they had brought them before the magistrates, they said, "These men are disturbing our city. They are Jews and are advocating customs that are not lawful for us as Romans to adopt or observe." The crowd joined in attacking them, and the magistrates had them stripped of their clothing and ordered them to be beaten with rods. After they had given them a severe flogging, they threw them into prison and ordered the jailer to keep them securely. Following these instructions, he put them in the innermost cell and fastened their feet in the stocks. So many things are going on here in this passage that it's impossible to highlight all of them. For now, it's enough to have a specific example of how simply practicing the faith could get you in trouble. In this case, exorcising a spirit from a servant rendered her no longer useful to her owners, depriving them of the income they could make off her ability of divination. That's what got Paul and Silas into trouble. But then when they were hauled before the magistrate, the charge expanded. I guess it would have been silly, I suppose, for the girls' owners to simply accuse them of depriving them of their income. So they accused them of generally disturbing the city's peace and, quote, advocating customs that are not lawful for Romans to adopt or observe. Remember, this episode took place in Philippi. This is exactly the sort of thing Paul thinks the church in Philippi could expect to happen to them. So he had a problem. How to encourage the Philippians to maintain their faith and faithfulness without buckling. His answer was not only to offer general words of encouragement, and it wasn't to sugarcoat the situation and tell them they would be okay. No, he has a very different way of encouraging them. He writes, "Only live your life in a manner worthy of the gospel, so that whether I come and see you or am absent and hear about you, I will know that you are standing firm in one spirit, striving side by side with one mind for the faith of the gospel, and are in no way intimidated by your opponents. For them, this is evidence of their destruction, but of your salvation. And this is God's doing, for he has graciously granted you the privilege not only of believing in Christ, but of suffering for him as well, since you are having the same struggle that you saw I had, and now hear that I still have. Live a life worthy of the gospel, he says. Stand firm. Strive side by side with one another. Do not be intimidated. These are all words meant to bolster their courage. But it's what he says next that catches my eye. God has graciously granted you the privilege not only of believing in Christ, but of suffering for him as well, since you are having the same struggle that you saw I had, and now hear that I still have. Surely the Philippians had seen what happened to Paul when he'd been in Philippi, and apparently they're having the same struggles now. So it's not enough to offer general words of encouragement. Paul boldly claims that suffering is not simply a consequence of their faith, it is actually a privilege. And it's a privilege because it is for the same Christ who suffered on their behalf. So my question is, would these words give you courage to face suffering without buckling? You and I will probably never know. And honestly, we don't even know if the Philippians themselves drew courage from Paul's words. But his message is certainly a powerful one. Whatever we may suffer, we suffer no more than Christ who suffered for us. Tomorrow, the peace that passes all understanding. But for now, may God continue to bless you and keep you in all that you do this day and in all the days ahead.